Alright, let's finish up the Korean War. Or the Korean police action. Because they never actually declared war, the United States. So they sometimes call it the Korean police action. They were writing tickets. No, they weren't. Alright. So here's a map. We've been playing with this. When I left you, the United Nations forces, which are largely the Americans, but there's also some Republic of Korean forces involved, had landed at Seoul. Had landed in Incheon to advance on Seoul, the South Korean capital. Okay? At the same time that MacArthur's invading Incheon, the 8th Army, get my pen, make sure it's working right here. The 8th Army was down here at Pusan, hanging out of his perimeter there. They were under the command of a guy named Walton Walker, which I've never ever put on the test. I just mentioned it because there's a highway here in Dallas named after him, and you might be wondering why, and now you know. Trying to untie my shoe. Let me hit pause. We're back. Sorry about that. All right. So at the same time, not exactly the moment, but basically the same time that the Marines are laying in Incheon, 8th Army will launch an attack down near the Pusan area to try to break out of the perimeter that they're trapped in. And so now it's the North Koreans that are in a hurt, okay? Because MacArthur, captures Seoul, he can, like I said, maybe go all the way across the peninsula, and the North Koreans now are caught between two opposing forces. So they're going to be going, man, we got to get back home. So the North Koreans will head back across the 38th parallel. I can't believe someone did a map of Korea and didn't put the 38th parallel. It's kind of right around about there, more or less. Okay? All right. So now the North Koreans are running for cover. All right. Now, here is where the United Nations decide, well, maybe we should go ahead and cross the 38th parallel into North Korea. I mean, Mr. Kim has launched this aggressive action against his neighbor. He can't be trusted. Maybe we should go and reunite the two Koreas, okay, and put Mr. Kim out of power. And so United Nations forces advance into North Korea, okay, and they push all the way up to that purple line on the map where it says UN Advance November 1950. So the war started in June, if I recall. It was late spring, early summer, at the 38th parallel. Okay, the North Koreans had gone all the way down to here by September, and then the United Nations forces had gone all the way up to here by November. Okay, so you see the first several months of war, massive movements back and forth up and down the peninsula. Very fluid situation. Okay? But here's where things go south. Alright? The United Nations forces are getting up here. They've almost gobbled up North Korea. Okay? And we're getting close to who? China. Alright. Which is a communist country, by the way. Remember? Okay? And they would like to support their communist brethren in North Korea, and they're probably not really keen on having a United Nations army operating on the border of China. And so in November of 1950, the Chinese enter the war. Now there were inklings, intelligence officers were starting to suspect that something weird was going on. They captured some people who didn't look Korean, and there was maybe signs of movement, but there was nothing clear going on. Then all of a sudden, the Chinese attack against United Nations forces. Okay. Now, one thing the Chinese have going for them, they don't have a lot of modern equipment. They don't have a whole lot of ammunition, but man, they got a big army. All right, and the Chinese literally just hit the UN forces really, really hard. Okay. So 8th Army, which had been down here at Pusan, they were working their way up this side of the peninsula. Okay. And then there's a series of like mountain ridges kind of down the middle that kind of more or less cuts things apart. Over here on this side, There's a smaller force called 10 Corps. 10 Corps. This is 8th Army over here. It's Corps. There you go. That doesn't look very good, does it? The Chinese hit the 8th Army, which is basically United States Army and Korean allies. And it's ugly. Okay, I mean the Chinese are massively outnumbered. The Americans, they catch them by surprise. 8th Army has to turn and run for its life back down to South Korea. Okay, they have to run a gauntlet of Chinese forces. It's sometimes called the gauntlet. Okay, lots of casualties. Not quite every man for himself, but maybe not the most organized retreat ever. But they have to get back home south of the 38th parallel. Okay, all right. Meanwhile, over on the other side of the peninsula, the Chinese also hit 10 Corps. So 10 Corps is basically the United States Marine Corps 1st Division, the 1st United States Marine Division. And there's a contingent of Royal Marine Commandos from Great Britain. And there's an Army division, I think it was the 7th Division if I recall. So it's like 2 divisions and some Royal Marine Commandos. And they're operating in the area of a frozen lake. It was actually a reservoir, a man-made lake that had been built by the Japanese called the Chosin Reservoir. That's Chosin, if I recall. Okay, and once again, the guy who drew this map, or maybe it was a girl, not only did they not put the 38th parallel, they left off the Chosin Reservoir. It's maybe right around about here somewhere. It's not important. It was frozen solid. Okay, and the Chinese hit the 10 Corps, and they're hoping to basically destroy 10 Corps because it's a much smaller unit than 8th Army. They do a pretty good job of destroying the 7th Infantry Division. The Army divisions caught on the wrong side of a reservoir and just chewed to pieces. The Marines gather up their dead and their wounded and what's left of the Army survivors and turn and fight their way out of the encirclement. Okay, so they've been surrounded. So they turn and they fight their way back to safety to the coast where the Navy can pick them up. And the old legend that Marines love to tell you is someone said, well, I thought Marines don't retreat. They supposedly said, retreat hell, we're just attacking in the other direction. You know what? See, look, I reach behind me. I remember, okay, here's a book. Retreat hell, we're just attacking in the other direction. See, I don't make this crap up. All right. So they were surrounded. They fought. They maintained unit cohesion, stayed an effective fighting force, and fought their way back to the coast where the Navy could pick them up. Okay. After that, the war kind of breaks into a stalemate period. Okay. This was all in 1950. Okay. The two sides are divided not too far from the 38th parallel. Okay. And at this point, the war becomes very much almost like World War I static warfare. Now, there's not the trenches, but United Nations forces, and by this point, there's other United Nations forces on the hand too. There were Turks and South Africans that I know of, and probably some other groups Australians, I think. Anyway, the usual gang of folks involved in this. And for like the last 2 years of a war, things don't change very much. We capture a hill, and then the enemy captures a hill, and then we exchange hills. If you've ever seen the movie, not the movie, it is a movie, but if you've ever seen the TV show MASH, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, you notice they never actually move. They're supposed to be a mobile hospital, and they just stay there. Well, this is probably in the latter part of the war, when you don't have all this changing back and forth. So the front lines don't change very much. 500 yards here, 1,000 yards there, local advances. And negotiations start breaking out. And they try to, I almost forgot about MacArthur and Truman. Doggone it, why didn't someone say something? Let me pause and gather my thoughts. Okay. How embarrassing. You're all yelling at your screens. Why aren't you talking about MacArthur and Truman? Truman-MacArthur controversy. I told you, the outline is partially there to make sure I don't forget something. So let's go back to the Chinese entering the war. Okay. MacArthur, who's the commander, is like going, well, we need to bomb the bridges over the Yalu River. We need to send the Air Force across the river and hit the Chinese supply depots. They want to wage war when this is what we need to do. Now, from a purely military standpoint, MacArthur's completely, totally right. Okay, if the Chinese are coming into the war, the best place to stop them is while they're still in China. Okay, MacArthur, militarily, he's bang on. Okay, so he's like, we should bomb the bridges, we should attack China. Okay. Now, the problem is, Harry S. Truman wants to keep this from escalating into World War III, because North Korea is being backed by the Soviets, and China at the time was friend with the Soviets. So Truman's trying to keep this thing from escalating. All right? So really, Truman's right from a geopolitical, strategic standpoint. MacArthur's just looking at it as a commander in the field, which really, that's his job. Okay? But what it really boils down to, if Harry S. Truman says jump, MacArthur's job is to say what? How high? Okay? All right. So Truman and MacArthur but Truman, the President of the United States, flies all the way out to Wake Island in the middle of the Pacific to meet with MacArthur, who is busy in Korea, and sit down and talk about this and see if they can get all this sorted out. Okay? But MacArthur's kind of got a big ego, as I've told you. He's the big hero of World War II, and he won't shut up. All right? So he continues to question administration policy. And finally, Harry S. Truman relieves MacArthur of his command, okay? Because he's not doing what he's been told. And this will get you in trouble when you're in the Army, even if you're Douglas MacArthur. Okay? Because in the end, Truman's the boss. So MacArthur comes back to the United States, is invited to speak to Congress, gives a long speech about his duty and honor and country, and how he was a cadet at West Point, and blah, 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 about his long, very storied career of service. And then at the end he goes, in the end, old soldiers never die. They just fade away. And MacArthur toys the idea of running for president in 1952, but there just isn't the support. There's just not enough people who think that's a good idea. All right. So anyway, that should have been before the bit about the stalemate and the negotiations breaking out. That's all after MacArthur's fired. So this goes on for a couple of years. They finally work out an armistice. Remember the word armistice from World War I. It's not a peace treaty. It's just a ceasefire. Okay? In 1953. Establishing a demilitarized zone between the two Koreas, where there aren't supposed to be any troops. Here's the 38th parallel. Here is the demilitarized zone. It's not that much different from the 38th parallel. Which kind of makes you think the whole 3 years was kind of pointless, because they kind of end up, more or less, right where they started. So when was the peace treaty actually signed to actually formally end the Korean War? We don't know, because it hasn't happened yet. They're still working on the negotiations, and Mr. Kim was talking about maybe trying to end the war, but no one puts a lot of confidence in him. All right, we're at 14 minutes. I got to keep these things under 15 minutes, so I'm going to be okay, except there's this last slide, but I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. It's about the second